In the villages of northern India, there are some roads people still refuse to walk after dark. They say the banyan trees remember every voice that passes beneath them. They say if the night is too quiet, it is because something else is listening. And in those places, people are taught from childhood never to answer when someone calls their name from the dark. Arjun had grown up hearing those warnings, and like many young men, he had long since learned to laugh at them. That night, he was walking home alone along a dirt road that cut through open fields and old banyan groves. The moon hung low above him, white and sharp, turning the dust on the path into a faint silver haze. The air was still. Even the usual rustle of insects had gone quiet. He was halfway home when he heard his name. Arjun. He stopped. The voice came again, soft and familiar, drifting through the trees. Arjun, wait. It sounded exactly like his sister. He turned at once, relief warming over him for a moment. Why are you out so late? He asked. No one answered. Then, at the edge of the road, standing half hidden beneath heavy hanging roots of a banyan tree, was a woman in a red sari. The fabric covered most of her face. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, and she stood so still that at first he thought she might be a neighbor from the next village. Then she giggled. It was a loud sound, almost shy, but something about it did not belong to a living woman. It was too thin, too hollow, as though it had traveled up from somewhere deep underground. Arjun frowned. Who are you? The woman tilted her head. The movement was slow and wrong, like a bird testing a broken neck. I dropped my anklet, she said. Can you help me find it? The voice was still gentle, still almost kind. Arjun took a step closer, and the smell hit him. At first, it was only a faint sweetness, like flowers left too long in water. Then it turned foul. Beneath the perfume of jasmine came a deeper stench, thick and sour, the smell of meat left in the sun. Arjun's throat tightened. The woman lifted her head a little. The moonlight fell lower, touching the edge of her sari. And then he saw her feet. They were turned backwards. The toes pointed behind her, and the heels faced him, as though her body had been assembled in the dark by something that did not understand human shape. Arjun did not move. For one long moment, neither did she. Then the woman slowly raised her hand and drew the black veil. There was no face behind it, only skin stretched tight over bone, pale and dry as old leather. Her mouth opened into a wide, empty grin, the lips pulled too far back from the teeth. Her eyes were hollow, sunken deep into the skull. But he knew with a terrible certainty that she could still see him. The banyan tree above them shifted in the wind. Its roots whispered against one another. The thing in the red sari smiled wider. Arjun remembered what his grandmother used to say. If a chudal calls your name, do not answer. If she stands in your path, do not run until you must. And if you see her feet turn backward, do not look at her face for longer than a breath. He forced himself to step back. The woman gave a soft, delighted laugh. Then she began to move, not walking, gliding, because her feet faced the wrong way. Every movement looked strained and unnatural, as though the earth itself were trying to reject her. Her shoulders jerked, her neck twitched. There came a dry, cracking sound from within her body, like bamboo splitting in heat. Arjun's chest seized. He backed away, slow at first, not daring to turn his eyes from her. But when she took another gliding step forward, the fear in him broke loose. He ran. Behind him, the road seemed to lengthen. The banyan trees leaned over the path like watching elders. He heard the woman's laughter rise behind him, soft and broken, and close enough to feel the nape of his neck. Arjun. The voice was no longer his sister's. It changed into something older, something hungry. He ran harder, stumbling through dust and roots, his lungs burning, his sandals slapping against the ground. The village lights were still far ahead, and the road behind him had become a long dark tunnel lined with shadows. Then he heard footsteps, not one, many, soft dragging sounds moving through the dirt behind him, as if the night itself had begun to follow. He reached his house at last and threw himself at the door, pounding until his hands hurt. His mother opened it just enough to see his face, and when she did, her expression changed at once. He did not need to speak. She had already seen what stood behind him. As Arjun entered his house, the smell followed with him. Wet earth, of flowers rotting in water, of something buried too long and clawing its way back up. His mother dragged him inside and slammed the door shut. For 3 nights after that, Arjun couldn't sleep. From the yard, from the road, from just beyond the window, he could hear a woman calling his name. Sometimes it would sound like his sister, sometimes a stranger. At once, just before dawn, he heard her scratching softly at the outer wall of the house, as though she were trying to find the weakest place to enter. By morning, the elders came. They burned neem and camphor at the threshold and tied red thread around the door frame. One of the older women told Arjun not to look toward banyan trees again, not even by accident, not even in daylight, because a chudal never forgets a face she has chosen. In some villages, they still say that if you walk the road after midnight and hear your name spoken in a loved one's voice, you should keep walking. Do not answer. do not turn. And if you see a woman in red standing beneath the trees with her feet turned backward and her smile too wide for a human mouth, then pray she has not already learned your name. Kim had worked for a well known naval and commercial shipbuilding corporation in South Korea for nearly 29 years. By then, he was the company's senior mechanical engineer. He and his wife, Jin Yan, had two children, a daughter and a son. Both were grown, married, and had families of their own. They also had two grandchildren, one from each child. His wife had been a teacher at an elementary school before her marriage. After Kim got promoted, she quit working. Kim enjoyed the finest things in life. The home that he bought reflected that taste. He provided the best for the family, yet the attic was his own personal space where he spent his spare hours over the weekends. No one was allowed in. There was a large wooden box in the attic that he kept locked. Inside, he kept an impressive collection of expensive watches, fine jewelry, designer perfumes, and other carefully chosen luxury goods that he had acquired over the years. Besides that, there was also a black metal box full of cash that he had saved over quite some time. That box had a combination lock. It was not as if Kim did not care for his family. He gave them everything they needed. But this was his. No one knew about the treasure trove because no one went to the attic. Nobody ever questioned why the attic remained locked. Over the years, the family had simply grown accustomed to leaving it alone. They respected one another's space more than they shared their lives. That Tuesday had been particularly demanding. The shipbuilding corporation where Kim worked was racing to complete a major contract scheduled for delivery in just 3 weeks. Crews had been working around the clock for days, with many employees carrying their day shifts into the night. Kim was no exception. As a senior mechanical engineer, he remained on site to oversee the final inspections and ensure the work continued without interruption. By the time the night shift had settled in, he was outside with the crew, conducting another inspection. Later that evening, Kim called his wife to let her know that he would not be coming home. The project was running behind schedule, and he would be staying on to oversee the night shift. She had grown accustomed to these unexpected calls over the years and wished him a good night before retiring to bed. A few hours later, the weather turned without warning. Powerful winds swept through the shipyard, unlike anything the workers had experienced before. Within minutes, the rain came down in torrents, reducing visibility across the site. The emergency siren sounded, and the workers abandoned their stations, making their way towards the nearest building. Kim was outside, carrying out a final inspection when he joined the rest of the crew. Then came the sound of metal giving away. Kim stopped and turned instinctively toward it. A towering crane lurched sideways. Before anyone could react, it crashed to the ground, pinning him beneath its weight. He lost his life almost instantly. No one saw it happen, as they were all rushing for shelter. Several minutes passed before the superintendent realized Kim was not with them. It took hours for the storm to end and for peace to be restored outside. All the men rushed out and called for Kim. His body was soon found crushed beneath the metal. It was 2 a.m. Senior management and the police arrived shortly afterward. An ambulance was on its way to transport the body to the hospital. It is always the hardest thing to inform a family of the death of a loved one. The CEO, with a team of senior officials, went to Kim's house. It was gut-wrenching for them to deliver the news. Jinyan collapsed as soon as she heard it. The body was released after an autopsy, and Kim was laid to rest. The company settled all compensation due to Jinyan. In recognition of Kim's dedication over nearly 3 decades, they added a generous sum of their own. A few days of mourning followed, but life had to go on. After a couple of months, the family decided to clear out Kim's personal belongings. The attic was emptied as well. The son moved in with his family to live with his mother. That first night, they heard footsteps coming from the attic. Kim's son climbed the stairs to investigate, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Before turning to bed, he left the attic light on. The following night, the footsteps returned. This time, they were accompanied by scraping and dragging sounds, as though heavy furniture was being shifted across the floor. Once again, he searched the attic from end to end. The room was empty. Puzzled, he left the light on and went back downstairs. From that night onward, no one in the house slept well. Every evening, the sounds returned. Something heavy scraped across the attic floor, followed by slow dragging noises and the occasional dull thud that echoed through the ceiling. Clothes left outside overnight were found stained with patches of red and brown. The radio would suddenly burst to life in the middle of the night, even after it had been switched off. And no matter how often the attic was cleaned, the smell of decay never seemed to leave. Unable to endure it any longer, Jinyan finally climbed the attic stairs one evening. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. Then she stopped. Kim stood in the middle of the room, his back turned toward her. His arms moved slowly, as though he were pulling and dragging something across the floor. Yet there was nothing there. He stopped. Without turning his body, his head slowly tilted until he was looking directly at her. His face was unnaturally pale. His hair hung in tangled strands around it, and the sickly smell of rotting flesh seemed to fill the room. "Where are my things?" he asked. His voice was low and coarse, nothing like the voice she lived beside for decades. "Where's my black box?" Jinyan collapsed where she stood. Within a few days, the family moved out of the house. Before long, it was sold. There is an old belief that the dead rarely return for what they have lost. They return for what they believe still belongs to them. China is home to thousands of ancient stone bridges, many of which have stood for centuries, quietly connecting villages separated by rivers and mountains. In Fujian province, where mist often settles over the valleys before sunrise, some bridges became the subject of local folklore, with stories passed down by generations, who believe certain crossings were best avoided after dark. One such story comes from a bridge known to locals as White Crane Bridge. No one remembers exactly when it was built. Its grey stone arches had crossed the river for so long that even the oldest villagers could only say it had always been there. Merchants crossed it on their way to bustling market towns, their carts heavy with silk, tea, and handmade wares. Farmers crossed it each autumn as families gathered to prepare for the harvest festival. Pilgrims crossed it on their way to mountain temples, believing the journey itself was an act of devotion. By day, White Crane Bridge was simply another crossing over the river. It was only after midnight that even the most experienced travelers chose the longer road home, not because anyone had disappeared, because of what people could not remember. The story concerns a traveling herbal merchant named Dong. Every month, Dong made the same journey between two villages, carrying dried roots, medicinal herbs, and handmade remedies. His route always brought him to the White Crane Bridge. Normally, he crossed after sunrise, but one winter evening, heavy rain delayed his journey. By the time he reached the bridge, the moon was already high above the valley. He considered waiting until morning. Instead, he laughed to himself. It is only a bridge. He adjusted the weight of his baskets and continued walking. The crossing took less than a minute. The river below flowed quietly beneath the arches. Halfway across, Dong noticed something unusual. The sound of footsteps had changed. Instead of echoing across the stone, they seemed strangely muffled, almost as though someone else was walking beside him. He stopped. The second pair of footsteps stopped too. He listened. Nothing. Only the river. He continued walking. Again, two steps of footsteps. One was his own, and one always matched his pace exactly. When he reached the opposite side, the sound disappeared. Dong looked behind him. The bridge was empty. He arrived safely at the next village before dawn. The innkeeper greeted him warmly. You made good time. Dong smiled. I crossed White Crane Bridge. The old man's expression changed. What time? Perhaps an hour after midnight? The innkeeper stared at him for several seconds before quietly pouring another cup of tea. You should rest. He never answered the question. The following morning, Dong prepared to continue his journey. As he packed his belongings, the innkeeper stopped him. You left something on the bridge. Dong frowned. I don't think I did. The old man handed him a folded piece of paper. I found this hanging from your basket. Dong unfolded it. Written in faded black ink were three Chinese characters. They were not addressed to anyone. They simply read, "You crossed alone." Dong politely laughed. Perhaps someone was playing a joke on him. He tucked the paper into his coat and thought no more about it. Months passed. Life continued as normal. Then, one evening, Dong visited a stonemason repairing a village shrine. As they talked, Dong noticed something carved into a loose block of granite. A name, his own. The carving was old. The edges had been worn smooth by decades of weather. Beneath it was a date. 23 years before Dong had been born. Disturbed, he traveled back to White Crane Bridge. The bridge was deserted. Carefully, he examined the stone railings. At first, they appeared to be covered in moss. Then, the evening sunlight shifted. Dozens of names became visible, each carved neatly into a stone. Some were recent, some ancient, many too faded to read. Dong searched until he found his own name again, exactly as it appeared on the shrine stone. The same characters, the same impossible date. He asked the oldest villagers about the bridge. Most refused to speak. One woman finally offered an explanation. When people cross after midnight, she said, the bridge remembers them. Dong frowned. What does that mean? The woman only shook her head. No one knows. Years later, travelers began noticing something else. Ever so often, a new name would appear on the railing. The strange part was this: the people whose names were carved there were still alive. When asked if they had ever crossed White Crane Bridge after midnight, every one of them answered the same way: I've never been there. And perhaps they truly believed it, because those who crossed after midnight were said to forget the journey completely. Everything except arriving home. Today, White Crane Bridge still stands. Whether the carvings ever truly existed is impossible to know. Time has weathered much of the original stone, and no official record has ever confirmed the story. But among some older families in Fukien, one warning has survived for generations. If you ever reach an old bridge after midnight, wait for sunrise. There are crossings that remember you long after you have forgotten them. Satya loved cooking. It was not simply another household responsibility. It was how she cared for the people around her. Every meal she prepared carried the quiet hope that just this once, someone might take notice of the effort behind it. One afternoon, while chopping vegetables for lunch, the knife suddenly slipped through her index finger. She cried out instinctively and looked at her hand. There was not a single cut. She stared at the knife. Useless blunt thing, she muttered. She tossed it into the sink and decided it was finally time to sharpen every kitchen blade in the house. In those days, there was an elderly artisan who arrived from village to village, sharpening knives, sickles, and household tools. It was a trade his father had taught him, and one he had continued for most of his life. He pushed a small wheel sharpening stone, fitted with a hand operated pulley, that spun the grinding wheel as he worked. While he sharpened her knives beneath the front veranda, Satya complained about how quickly she lost their edge. It makes the cooking twice as difficult, she said. The old man paused for a moment. I might have a better solution, he said. She folded her arms. Go on. He smiled as though remembering someone dear to him. My grandmother never relied on kitchen knives. She used an arvamane. Now, the arvamane was a traditional kitchen tool found in many South Indian homes. It consisted of a curved iron blade fixed upright on a heavy wooden base, allowing vegetables, coconut, and spices to be sliced by drawing them against the blade rather than moving a knife through them. The artisan took the old tool out of his tote bag. It does most of the work for you once you learn to use it. Your wrists hardly tire at all. He laughed softly. This old blade is probably older than I am, and yet it still cuts better than most new knives. Satya narrowed her eyes. I feel like you're trying to sell me something. I suppose I am. You see, the old man said, resting a hand on the blade. My grandmother cooked with one of these every day of her life. Most people think that it's just another kitchen tool, but the old ones were made from good iron, proper iron. His eyes lingered on the blade for a moment. A sharp knife comes and goes, but one of these, he gently tapped on the wooden base. This is kitchen gold, he chuckled. I had never intended to part with it, but if it finds another kitchen where it will be used every day, I think she would approve. The price he quoted was surprisingly modest, and Satya accepted immediately. She attempted to use it the same afternoon. It was a little heavier than she expected, and it took a while for her to get used to it. But before long, she preferred it over every other kitchen knife she owned. Several weeks passed. One afternoon, as she walked past the kitchen, she caught the unmistakable aroma of something cooking. She stopped to check, but the stove was cold. Her children were playing in the next room. Her husband was still at work. Yet the fragrance lingered in the air. She smiled to herself. Perhaps one of the neighbors was preparing for a celebration. Still, the smell stayed with her. There was roasted coriander, fresh ground pepper, curry leaves sizzling in hot oil. Something richer followed. Cashews, perhaps saffron, or a spice she had never learned to identify. The more she thought about it, the more impossible it became to forget. Even after she went to bed, the aroma seemed to follow her. That night, she dreamed she was preparing a chicken korma unlike anything she had ever cooked before. She watched unfamiliar hands roasting spices, grinding fresh coconut, and measuring ingredients with effortless confidence. Every step unfolded before her as though someone were quietly teaching her. When she awoke, every ingredient remained perfectly clear in her mind. She immediately wrote everything down. That afternoon, she prepared the dish exactly as she had seen it. Her family loved it. "This is wonderful," her husband said. Even the children asked for second helping. Satya could not hide her smile. "This recipe is entirely mine," she said proudly. "I thought of every ingredient myself." Compliments were rare in her home. Her family had always appreciated her cooking, but like many families, they had grown accustomed to it. Preparing 3 meals a day often meant hearing more complaints than praise. So those simple words meant more to her than anyone ever realized. A few nights later, she had another dream, another recipe, another unfamiliar sequence of spices and ingredients. Once again, she copied everything into a notebook the moment she woke. This time, she invited her neighbor, Lata, for lunch. Lata could hardly stop praising the meal. "Did you really come up with this yourself? You're gonna have to teach me, you know." Satya laughed. "I'll show you." While preparing the coffee, she pointed towards the arva mane resting in the corner. "I only bought that recently from the old artisan." Lata walked over and ran her fingers across the iron blade. "This thing looks like it has lasted generations," she said. "I'm sure the food tastes better when it's made with something like this." Satya shrugged. "Maybe, but the recipe is still mine." Lata smiled. "Would you mind if I borrowed it for a few days? We have a family function next week. I'd love to try it before deciding whether to buy one myself." Satya hesitated. "I'll return it on Sunday," Lata promised. "2 days only," she confirmed. "I'll bring it back." Lata carefully carried the arva mane to her home. For the next few days, Satya returned to using her kitchen knives. She noticed something almost immediately. The dreams stopped. When her husband and children asked whether another special dish was coming soon, she simply smiled. I'm still thinking over it." Sunday arrived, then Monday. The arva mane never came back. Satya was not angry. Lata was, after all, a close friend. She assumed she would return it soon enough. A few days later, Satya woke from an afternoon nap after noticing an unpleasant smell drifting through the house. It led her straight to the kitchen. Everything had spoiled. Fresh vegetables had blackened. Cooked food prepared only a day earlier had turned rotten. Even the rice stored in sealed containers smelled sour. She spent the next 2 hours throwing away food and scrubbing every surface in the kitchen. That evening, the family ate dinner from a nearby restaurant. Late that night, Satya was startled awake by the sound of something crashing downstairs. Then came the slow scrape of wooden drawers opening. Metal utensils shifted. Lids clattered softly against one another. The small nightlight in the kitchen cast only a faint yellow glow. She walked quietly toward it. Several cupboards stood open. Spice tins had been moved across the counter. A grinding stone still glistened as though someone had just washed it. Then she saw it. An old woman crouched in the corner of the kitchen. She was bent over the empty space where the Arvamane normally rested. Her long grey hair hung in tangled strands. She searched frantically with trembling hands. Then she slowly lifted her head. Her eyes settled on Satya. Where is it? Satya stood frozen. Where did you keep it? You stole it from me. Without thinking, Satya whispered, It's with my neighbor." The old woman's face tightened. It was not yours to give away. The words echoed through the kitchen. Then the old woman simply vanished. Satya turned to run and almost collided with her husband. She threw her arms around him, struggling to explain what she had just seen. Then she noticed his face. His expression had drained of all color. I saw her. I watched her disappear. They packed their bags and went to her in law's place. Early the next morning, Satya went straight to Lata's home and asked for the Arvamane back. She did not offer any explanation. Lata returned it without question. From there, Satya went directly to the old artisan. She placed the Arvamane gently into his hands. I don't want my money back, she said. I received more from it than I expected. She hesitated. But your grandmother, she's still attached to this. The old man's smile slowly disappeared. For a long moment, he simply rested his hand on the blade. I wondered, he said quietly. I always felt she never truly let it go. Satya nodded. Then perhaps it's time someone helped her. The old man thanked her and carried the old tool back to his home. Satya invited a priest to bless the house and perform prayers for the family. Life slowly returned to normal. She went back to her trusted kitchen knives and the recipe she had always known. Her husband never complained about her cooking ever again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, I'd love for you to subscribe and join the Story Lantern community. New episodes arrive every week, bringing you original horror stories inspired by the folklore, myths, and legends of Asia. If you have a favorite story from your own country or culture, drop it in the comments or send it to me at asian.myth.horror@gmail.com. I'm always looking for new tales to feature in an upcoming episode. Until next time, when the shadows reach for what they've lost, keep your lantern lit.